Hello everyone, welcome to my graduation presentation. I want to share with you today my graduation project, named Balancing Power, Explorations Toward a More Decolonial Participatory Design Process. I decided to self-initiate this project based on my own interest in addressing social causes using my profession and especially participatory design.
Participatory design, which I will call PD from now on in this presentation, is a design approach used to democratize the design practice by including in the process the people intended to use the outcome. When working for social change and justice, the practice intends to maintain its democratic nature by giving power and agency to the most vulnerable in society. However, these good intentions are not always easy to accomplish. In a complex system that deals with different stakeholders, designers might have practices, attitudes, and assumptions that perpetuate oppression and inequalities inside the design process itself. Even unconsciously, designers may maintain the same power dynamics they claim to change, which affects the most vulnerable in the process.
Acknowledging this urgency of focusing on the power dynamics inside a PD process, I investigated what good practices could be exercised by designers to be more accountable for socially just and power balanced relationships when working with marginalized communities. This attempt to build an alternative process, the link from the mainstream and normalized ways of doing PD, is what I will call decolonial design.
To achieve this goal, this project was divided into three main phases. First, I conducted a research for design phase, then a research through design phase in the neighborhood of Afrikaan der Wacht in Rotterdam South, and finally a design phase. In the first phase, I took a theoretical approach by conducting a literature review and an empirical approach by carrying out semi-structured interviews with experienced PD designers. During this research, I learned that designers can hold a lot of power over the community and the process due to a number of factors such as imposing design methods, framing the problem in the project, and making decisions during the whole process. In turn, the communities that experience this power have less power to act and influence the desired outcomes for their contexts.
To have ideas and inspiration about what good practices could be developed to overcome this oppression and propose a decolonial PD process, I studied the work of the Brazilian philosopher Paulo Freire, and especially his pedagogical model for liberation. In his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Freire proposes a power balance relationship between the teacher and the students in order to overcome structural oppression through the learning process.
In the study of his work, it was found that it is necessary to create a space for dialogue and co-learning between the actors, which would in turn lead to critical reflections about the context. According to Freire, this reflection is not enough, and it has to be complemented with action in a cycle that he calls praxis. This cycle will lead the actors to see the reality as something that can be changed by collective action to finally achieve liberation. One of the most interesting views of Freire is that liberation from the oppressive systems is necessary also for the oppressors, who can be liberated from their condition just through the action of the oppressed.
After having this theoretical framing, the second phase started by proposing a detailed structure for a PD process to be carried out with the community. This process contemplated fixed activities designed by myself and divided into three main iterations.
However, early in this phase, and thanks to a co-reflective session with design practitioners about the activities I was designing, I realized that a decolonial PD process could be proposed if and only if it was developed together with the community. Throughout this session, I realized that by establishing a process to be followed by the community members before even meeting them, I was already imposing my assumptions and biases as a designer. This imposition went from the timing and the phases of the project till the wording, the activities, and the methods proposed to frame a problem and carry out the project. In this sense, I realized that to decolonize a PD process, I needed to decolonize myself. which meant relearning the normalized tasks a designer develops in the process and relearn how to engage in new ways with the community.
Thanks to this realization, the research to be conducted in African Divide had a shift in the approach and was based on non-structured explorations, allowing different moments of engagement based on dialogues between myself, the designer, and the members of the community.
I engage with the context and the community in many different ways. I was an observer looking for opportunities and spots to meet people in the context. I was a participant in basketball games during the weekends, joining them for community activities like neighborhood meetings, brunch, and even public theater. I was even able to be part of a co reflection session with two members of the community about social justice issues. In this meeting, we also discussed how to collectively tackle the issue of gentrification in the neighborhood as a topic that the community deeply cares about.
Because of the shift in the approach, the process went from being this to have a final form more like this one. I call this process the designer's path towards liberation because it started to liberate me from being an oppressor and allow me to create engagement and discussions with the inhabitants of African Divide. With this new way of approaching the community and the design process, it was possible for me to establish two main research outcomes. First, the reinterpretation of the role of the designer, and second, my own statements for the colonial PD process. Let's first talk about the reinterpretation of the role of the designer.
Participatory design claims to reinterpret the role of the designer from the ego designer, the professional working from the studio without any contact with the user, to the one of the facilitator. But in this project, the role of the designer was pushed even further by exploring how a designer can be a partner and a participant in the design process. If I map my experiences, the first attempt with a structured plan was on the facilitator's side. Then my explorations moved towards the extreme right side of the axis, by being a participant in the context, followed by being a participant in community activities, and finally closer to the partner role in the middle, in which the ownership and control over the activity were shared in the co-reflection with two members. As can be seen, the roles on the left side of the axis tend to have more control over the project and the communities than the roles on the right side of the axis, as the elements that gave power to the designer are taken away. Moreover, the roles of the designer identified in my project can be compared to the Arnstein's ladder of participation. This scale shows different types of citizens' involvement in participatory projects, going from non-participation on the left side until citizens' control and full ownership on the right. Seen from the perspective of the community, the less power the designer has over the project, the more the members are able to exercise their power to act and influence the process and the outcome. This does not mean that designers are not allowed to exercise their skills or knowledge in a participatory project. Rather, it shows that to balance and redistribute power in design processes, designers need to create dialogical spaces where the designer can re-evaluate and renegotiate their role depending on the project phase and what it requires.
After exploring the new roles of the decolonial designer, I was able to establish 5 personal statements about the new understanding of a decolonial design process. I emphasize their personal nature as they are based on my own experience in the context and the learnings I had in the attempt to be decolonized in this project.
The first statement is that a decolonial PD process is built with the community. A decolonial PD process entails giving relevance to the relational aspect of the project and giving space for the designer to enter in close and horizontal relations with the community. In this way, trust can be built to develop a project structure and a plan that aligns and respects the identities of all the social actors in the process. In the case of Freire, the dialogue and co-learning help in building the pedagogical program, while in my case, those same notions help me build the structure of the project. The second statement is that for a decolonial PD process, the designer needs to be decolonized too. To be able to develop a PD process that is more power balanced and socially just, the normalized notion of the designer inside that process needs to be questioned. As was already conceived by Freire, just by changing the notion of the teacher, the designer in this case, the program can change too. In this research, the decolonization of the designer implies de-learning the normalized ways of developing a PD process and engaging with a project and a community in a completely different way. Just by this new engagement with the community, designers can be liberated from their oppressive position, just as the oppressed liberate the oppressor in Freudian theory. My third statement is that the designer is designing just in collaboration with the community. A PD project that is more power balanced entails seeing the project as a collaboration and not just as participation. This type of process does not conceive an end user to design for, but rather considers the community as equal partners in the process. This statement, however, seems to be true in my research, which was developed in early stages in the process, where not even a problem framing was reached yet. An assumption is that for future stages in the process, the designers may indeed design alone, as some tasks may be assigned to them based on their skills. Still, even those possible moments of designing without the community have to be intended under the frame of a collaboration in which everyone is working towards a common goal. The fourth statement is that a decolonial project for social justice is more than what can be framed by design. Especially when developing projects that aim to tackle complex social problems, seems crucial to recognize that the project itself is more than one design can frame and manage. Understanding that the design practice and the design skills are one more thing brought to the table, it's acknowledging that to reach social change, it is necessary to work with others, but not in our own terms and views, by considering all types of knowledge as valuable as ours. Finally, the last statement is that a decolonial PD process needs to be built in reflection and action. During this research, it was acknowledged that to decolonize the PD process, it is needed a consciousness about the power dynamics inside of it and how they affect the relationship between the social actors in the project. As such, the notion of praxis developed by Freire seems a useful practice. Doing periodical checks about the activity and actions taken seems a good strategy to avoid biases and overpass unconscious oppressive attitudes.
Even if the main outcomes of this research project are the findings just exposed, I wanted to make my research more useful for other designers who are interested in developing participatory design processes that are more power balanced. Understanding that this type of processes cannot be structured in only one way because it depends on the context and the community the designer is working with, I cannot give a specific and singular way to carry it out as it would go against its own nature. Instead, what I did was to collect in a document the different findings, the reflections, and the questions posed by my peers and my mentors during this project and transform them into a series of reflective questions. This with the aim of challenging assumptions and support a new understanding for a decolonial PD process.
In this way, I designed a document focused on a phase called the pre-project phase, in which the questions are related to three main topics. The first topic, how to conceive an alternative understanding of a PD process. In this section, some examples of the questions are: who is deciding who participates in the process and why? Do the members of the community have the possibility to say no to the project? Or, am I willing to build a plan and a project structure with the community I am going to work with? The second topic is how to position myself as a designer in this process. In this section, some of the questions are: how am I needed in this project? Am I prepared to adapt my role to what the community needs from me? And the last section, how to engage with the community in a power balanced way. Having questions like: how can I support the community in what they are already doing? How does this activity fit the context, practices, and dynamics? To read all the document, please go to the Drive link I shared with you earlier and feel free to download it.
And now, to wrap up this presentation, with this project, I investigated the new practices for PD designers to engage with communities in power-balanced ways in early stages of the process, in which the role of the designer needed to be decolonized. I hope that this research can contribute to the design practice and the theory to develop more socially just projects that can lead to collective liberation. Finally, I want to thank everyone who supported me during this research. To my friends, my mentors, my family, and the members of African Vibe who were always super welcoming. Thank you for listening. Now, I'll be happy to go back to the Zoom call to hear your comments and your questions about my project. Bye!